Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of our JSON Server series. In this part, we're going to be looking at making GET requests with JSON Server. So let's take a look at the types of GET requests that we'll be covering in this video. There'll be 7 things that we will focus on, and these 7 are definitely the most common things that you might need to do when getting your data with JSON Server. So number 1, we'll review how to view all our data, which we already saw in the previous video, but we'll look at it again. Number 2, we'll talk about viewing a specific item. Number 3, filtering data. Number 4, sorting data. 5, getting a range of data. 6, setting a pagination limit. And 7, doing a text search. So let's get started. Alright, so if you watched the previous video, you will remember that we left off here. We basically installed our JSON server. We entered our mock data, which was our student data right here. We also did professor's data, just as an additional example. Now, we're only going to be working with our student data, so I'm actually going to go ahead and remove the professors. It's up to you if you want to do that also, but for me, I just want it to look a bit cleaner. So, and let's remove the comma. Okay, and there we go. So now we only have our student data. Okay, and we also learn how to start up our JSON server and to actually view our data. Okay, so let's just review that. This is actually the first topic that we'll be covering here, how to view all our data. So to do that, if you recall, all we need to do is click on our resource here. You can use Control and then just click on it. And it's going to show up right here in our browser on the default port of 3000. All right. So there we go. That's how we view all our data. Now, obviously, we're just kind of looking at the data here in our browser. But if you were to do this in an app, you'd probably, do something a bit more creatively. You would output this data into your web app somehow, right? And again, we'll get to all of this in the last part of the series when we do our actual project. Now, what if we want to view only one of our students? So let's say I only want to see the information for our second student here, Brandon Sokolsky. So the easiest way to do this is by using the student's ID. All right, so let's go back to our data here. And we're going to be doing this right in the browser since we're just kind of learning how to make GET requests. Obviously, when it comes to practice, when we're actually doing a project, we will be doing everything in our code. But let's go ahead and type in another / here and the ID of our student. So in our case, it's 2, right? So Brandon Sokolsky has the ID of 2. Let's press enter. And as you can see, we're only seeing our target student. And of course, you can do this with any other of our students. So let's say if I type in the ID of 3, I'm going to see Sarah Bennett. And if I type in the ID of 1, I'm going to see Caroline, Mayer, etc., etc. All right, so that's how we view a specific item in our data. So filtering is all about viewing data based on a certain condition or criteria that we decide on. So instead of seeing all our data, we only want to see specific items from our data based on a condition. So as an example, let's say we only want to see students that have a major of psychology. So as you can see, we have 2 students with that major. We have Caroline and we have Peter. All right, so how do we do that with JSON Server? Well, we're going to go up here to our browser and we're going to type in a question mark, and then we'll enter something called a query parameter. All right, A query parameter is just basically a key and a value. So to see students whose major is psychology, I would type in major equals psychology, and that's it. And as you can see, we only get these two students. Now, you can make it a bit more sophisticated. So you can actually set or enter even more conditions if you like. I'm going to give you another example here with the year of birth, although it would be a bit easier to see when we had more data. But let's say, in addition to the major of psychology, we also want a student whose year of birth is 19, let's say 1990. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we have to separate our two query parameters. So we're going to be entering another query parameter. But to separate this one from the next one, we're going to enter an ampersand. And then we're just going to type YOB, year of birth, equals to 1990. And there we go. Now we only get one student. Of course, if there were more students who had the same year of birth, we would get all those students. So there you go. That's how we filter data based on a certain condition or conditions. So let's talk about sorting our data. Now, if you look at our data right now, you can see that it's sorted by ID, right? And that's because that is how we originally entered it in our db.json file. If you look here, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, let's say we want to sort our data differently. We want to sort it by name instead, so the name property, which is very common to sort things by names, right? So how do we do that? Obviously, right now, you can see we have Caroline first, starting with the C, then we have Brendan second, Sarah third, and then Peter. So it's definitely not in alphabetical order right now. So let's change that. We're going to go here to our browser, and we're going to enter another query parameter or query string. So remember, we start with a question mark, and then, this is important, we're going to type in an underscore first, and then we'll type in sort equals, and then the property by which we want to sort our data. In our case, it's going to be name. Okay, so if you press enter, you'll see that now our data is in alphabetical order. So Brandon is first, Caroline is second, Peter is third, and Sarah is fourth. Great. Now by default, our data will get sorted in ascending order, right? What if we want to reverse that? So we want to basically have Sarah go first and then finish with Brandon. Well, to do that, we're going to have to add something else here. We're going to say and, so ampersand, and then we're going to say order equals descending, so DESC for short. And there we go. Now we've successfully sorted our data in descending alphabetical order. And you can do the same type of sorting by any other property. So what else can we sort it by? Well, we have year of birth, right, which are numbers. So let's say we want to sort our data by the year of birth. So let's go back here. We'll delete all of this, and we're going to say, we'll keep sort equals YOB. And there we go. We have it sorted in ascending. Okay, so 1990, 91, 92. And as you can guess, to have reverse ascending, we're going to type in ampersand, underscore, and we're going to say order equals descending. And now we have 92, 91, 90, and 90. Okay, so very useful little trick to be able to sort our data in this way. So let's talk about getting a range of data. Now, this is going to look similar to filtering because we're essentially doing the same thing. We're setting some kind of a condition that determines what kind of data we're going to get as an output. But it's not exactly the same as filtering. It's perhaps a little bit more sophisticated, you might say. So let's look at our data again, and let's say we want to only see students whose year of birth is 1991 or higher. Okay, so that means we should be only seeing Sarah Bennett, 1991, and we should be seeing Caroline Mayer. So how do we do that? Well, let's go back here to our address bar. We're going to start once again with a query parameter. So we have question mark. And now we're going to start by typing the property that we're interested in. So in this case, year of birth. Then we'll type in underscore. And here we're going to type GTE. Okay, now that stands for greater than or equal to. And now we're going to say equals. And we're going to put here 1991. Let's press enter. And as we can see, we only get 2 students for our output, the ones that we expected to get. Great, so now let's do the opposite. So first, let's go back to our original data. Now, let's say we want to get students this time whose year of birth is 1991 or lower. So see if you can guess how to do this yourself. Maybe you can pause this video and just try it out. And now I'm going to give you the answer. Okay, so let's go back here. We're going to start our query parameter. We're going to type in year of birth underscore. Let's put less than or equals to this time. So maybe you could have guessed that if we have greater than or equals to, we also have less than or equals to, equals sign, and 1991. Okay, and as predicted, we have our 3 students, and we don't have Caroline here, who was born later than that. Great. So let's do one more little thing. We're going to try to set a condition where we want to get students between certain years. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. Let's go back to our original data. So we still have our 4 students. Now, to make this example easier, I'm actually going to add a 5th student. So let's go back to db.json. And we're going to put a comma here. And I'm just going to paste my 5th student here that I made up. Okay, so if you'd like, you can just copy the same data. Let's save that. Let's go back. So JSON Server should have picked up our new addition now. So let's click on this again. And as you can see, we have our 5th student as well now. Perfect. Now, what I want to do this time is I want to set a condition to only see students between certain years of birth. Okay, so let's say between the year 1990 and 1991. In other words, we're not going to see Stephanie, our new student here, because she was born in 89, and we also should not see Caroline because she was born in 1992. We should only see these 3 students here. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, again, you might be able to guess based on what we've learned so far. So maybe pause this video and try to figure it out yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to show you the answer. So let's go in here. We're going to start typing our query parameter. So question mark. Let's go year of birth. Now first we're going to set our minimum, so the low cutoff point, which is going to be 1990. So let's go underscore. We're going to say greater than or equal to 9090. Okay, and then remember to separate our query parameters. We need to use an ampersand, and then we're going to say year of birth underscore LTE less than or equal to 1991. Press enter, and just as we expected, we only see the 3 students that meet this criteria. So again, notice we have 2 different conditions here, separated by an ampersand. So another thing that JSON Server allows us to do is to set how many items of data we want to see per page. All right, so this is the data that we currently have. Remember, during our last example, we added a 5th student to our data called Stephanie Baglieri. So we have 5 students. Now, let's say I want to specify that I only want to see a maximum of 3 students on a page. Obviously, right now we have all 5 on our page, right? So how would we do that? How would we specify a limit to how many students we can see per page? So let's go to our address bar. Once again, let's start typing our query string. We're going to start by typing underscore page equals 1. So what this says is basically it tells JSON Server that we're going to be on page 1. All right, and then we're going to say ampersand underscore limit equals 3. So as you can probably guess, we're saying to JSON Server that we want to see 3 students, or a maximum of 3 students per page. So let's press enter, and as you can see, we can only see our first 3 students right now. Now, what happened to the remaining 2 students? How do we see those? Well, to see them, we're going to have to just change one number here. So we want to go from page 1 to page 2, and if we press enter, we will see our remaining 2 students. Okay, so remember, we're just specifying our page numbers here, and this limit, it applies to all the pages, right? It's just a kind of a general limit that we set. Now let's do something just a bit different. So let's say instead of 3 students per page, we would like to see 2 students per page. Now, right now, you'll see that if you go to page 3, we're not going to have anything, right? Because we only had 5 students in our data. So our students, we could see them in the first 2 pages, right? Now, if we change this to page 1 again and set our limit to 2, so to be able to see 2 students per page, we're going to see 2 students on page 1. We will see also 2 students on page 2. And as you can guess, we should also see our last remaining student on page 3. And that's exactly what we see. All right. Now, by analogy, you can imagine if you set your limit to 1 student per page, then you're going to end up having 5 pages, and each page is going to have just 1 student. That probably would not be too practical, but perhaps sometimes you might want to do that. Okay, and that is how we set pagination limit with JSON Server. Now, the last thing we're going to look at is how to perform a text search with JSON Server. You probably visited websites in the past where you needed to search for a specific word. Usually you probably use control find, and then you just search for a specific keyword that you'd like to find. Now, this is essentially the same thing, except we're gonna see how to do that with a GET request, right? So once again, we have our 5 students here. And this is going to be pretty simple. We're going to go back to our address bar. We're going to start our query parameter. And we're just going to say Q, which stands for query, equals to, and then we start typing our keywords. So obviously, JSON Server is going to look at our data here, right? And see if it can match any text in our data to whatever we type in right now as a value. All right, so let's say we want to look for a student called Caroline. Okay, so we don't even need to type her whole name. We can let's just type Carol, for example. And if we click enter, JSON Server has narrowed down our data just to Caroline. Okay, so it basically found the first 5 letters of her name and matched us to this piece of data. Okay, so let's go back to our data once again. Let's search for something else. So again, question mark Q equals to. Now let's say I want to search for psychology. So remember, we have 2 students whose major is psychology. So we have Caroline and Peter. So we should get 2 results here. So again, let's just type psych for short, enter, and there we go. We have our 2 students. Let's maybe do a search for a number instead of a string. So go back to our data first. Let's say in 1990, we have 2 students born in that year. So let's go question mark Q equals 1990, and we have our 2 students born in 1990. Okay, so as you can imagine, very useful for any kind of search functionality on your website or web app. And that concludes our coverage of the different GET requests that we can do with JSON Server. Now remember, we covered all the most frequently used ones here, but if you do want to get a bit deeper into JSON Server GET requests, once again, I refer you to the JSON Server documentation, which I mentioned in the first video, and the link to which you can find in the video description. In the next video of this series, we're going to talk about how to make post, put, patch, and delete requests with JSON Server. So I hope to see you there.